things that never make it into the travel brochures. Stories from tourists, expats, and even locals. Stories about real dangers, hidden scams, and sudden risks you won't see coming until it's too late. So before you pack your bags or buy that one-way ticket, you need to hear these. This is the dark side of Europe. 30 shocking travel truths and stories Americans need to know before visiting or moving here. And trust me, by the time we get to the last one, you'll understand why I'm saying this could literally save your life. Let's start with one of the deadliest and work our way down. 30. Number 30. Fatal alpine and amp. Cliff hazards. Europe's landscapes are the stuff of postcards. Towering snow peaks in the Swiss Alps. Pastel cliffside villages along Italy's Amalfi Coast. Jagged trails in the Dolomites. But here's the part no one puts on Instagram. In many of these breathtaking spots, there are no guardrails, no warning signs in English, and often no rangers or patrols to keep you from making a fatal mistake. The danger isn't always where you expect it. In Switzerland's Aletsch Glacier region, parts of the trail skirt sheer drops with nothing between you and the abyss but a few inches of loose gravel. In the French Alps, Chamonix has claimed more than a few overconfident hikers who strayed off marked routes chasing a better view. In Norway, the famous Preikestolen, or Pulpit Rock, is an Instagram favorite, but the ledge has no safety barrier. One wrong step or strong gust of wind, and you're done. Even coastal cliffs can be deadly. On the Amalfi Coast in Italy, sections of the Path of the Gods trail have crumbled under tourists' feet, sending them tumbling hundreds of feet. In Ireland, the cliffs of Moher see hundreds of thousands of visitors a year. And despite multiple warning signs, every year there are tragedies, sometimes because someone leaned too far over the edge for a photo. And it's not just dramatic storms or extreme sports that cause these accidents. Many happen in perfect weather, in broad daylight, when someone simply misjudges their footing, slips on loose rock, or backs up for that perfect selfie. In Spain's Canary Islands, hikers have been fatally injured on volcanic cliff paths after underestimating how unstable the terrain could be. The most chilling part? Local rescue teams often say the same thing. It wasn't the climb that killed them, it was the moment they let their guard down. If you're coming for the views, come prepared. Wear sturdy hiking shoes with real grip, no flip-flops or fashion sneakers. Stick to marked trails, even if that side path looks more adventurous. Don't ignore local advice. If a route is closed, there's a reason. And most importantly, remember that the most dangerous step is often the one you don't see coming. The mountains here are stunning, but they do not forgive mistakes, which is why this is only the first of the 30 travel truths you'll hear today. By the time we get to number 1, you might just rethink what you thought you knew about Europe's safe beauty. 29. Kidnapping for ransom. Rare but real. Now this one sounds like something out of a movie, but it's real. Kidnapping for ransom is something most Americans associate with unstable countries or war zones, but in parts of Europe, the risk, while rare, is not zero. And for certain unlucky travelers, it becomes a nightmare that feels ripped from a movie script. In southern Italy, police have investigated organized crime-linked abductions targeting wealthy-looking visitors, especially those flaunting jewelry or driving expensive rental cars in rural areas. In Eastern Europe, there have been cases near Ukraine's western border where small-time criminal gangs grab foreigners, holding them briefly to extort a few thousand euros before releasing them. Even in tourist hotspots, like Spain's Costa del Sol, there are reports of express kidnappings. Victims are forced to withdraw the maximum amount from multiple ATMs before being let go. In some cases, it's not even a dramatic snatch and grab. One American businessman in Prague was lured by someone posing as a rideshare driver, only to be driven to an isolated area and told to transfer money via mobile banking. In parts of the Balkans, travelers have been targeted after posting their real-time locations on social media, giving would-be criminals a blueprint for when they're alone or away from busy streets. What makes this risk unsettling is that it's not always about targeting high-profile figures. Sometimes, It's purely opportunistic. Someone sees a chance, takes it, and disappears long before the police can react. How to reduce the risk? Avoid wearing expensive watches, jewelry, or designer bags in unfamiliar areas, especially at night. Use verified taxi apps or well-known rideshare companies, and always check the license plate before getting in. Limit posting your exact location online until after you've left the spot. And if something feels off, trust that feeling and remove yourself from the situation. These incidents are rare, but they happen just enough to remind you that Europe, for all its charm, isn't immune to the same dangers you'd find anywhere else in the world. And in some places, the difference between an amazing trip and a horror story can be the split second you decide whether or not to step into that unmarked car. Sudden border closures. One of Europe's biggest draws for Americans is the idea of borderless travel. Hop on a train in Paris, and you're in Brussels in under 2 hours, no passport checks, no hassle. But here's the catch. Those borders can close overnight, and when they do, your travel plans can unravel in ways you never saw coming. In 2020, when COVID-19 hit, whole countries shut their borders with only a few hours. Notice, Americans vacationing in Austria suddenly found they couldn't re-enter Italy, even though they'd left their hotels and their passports behind. Others got stuck in tiny border towns with no open hotels, forced to sleep in train stations until restrictions eased. Political unrest can cause the same chaos. In 2023, tensions between Serbia and Kosovo triggered sudden closures of crossing points, leaving travelers stranded for days. In Eastern Europe, security events linked to the war in Ukraine have closed borders, with almost no public warning. And in the Schengen zone, police sometimes reinstate border checks temporarily during large events, like the G7 summit in Germany, meaning that your smooth day trip can suddenly turn into hours-long queues under the sun. Even health scares beyond pandemics have caused chaos. In 2011, an E. coli outbreak in northern Germany led to regional restrictions that made it impossible to cross between certain states without documentation, something most foreign travelers never saw coming. What can you do to protect yourself? Always carry your passport and any necessary visas, even on day trips within the EU. Have a backup plan for transport and accommodation if you get stuck. Follow local news in English. Apps like Euronews or local embassy alerts can be lifesavers. And if your trip hinges on crossing a border, make that leg of your journey earlier in the day rather than at night, when fewer services are available if things go wrong. Europe's open borders are a marvel, until they're not. And when they close, it's rarely with enough warning to save your itinerary. The question is, if it happened to you, would you be ready? Earthquake risks in unexpected spots. When Americans think about earthquakes, we picture California or Alaska, not Europe. But parts of southern Europe are sitting right on seismic fault lines. Places like central Italy, western Greece, and even parts of Turkey have all been hit with powerful quakes in recent years. In 2016, a 6.2 magnitude quake struck central Italy, killing nearly 300 people. And here's the worst part. A lot of the buildings in these historic towns aren't built to modern earthquake standards. They're hundreds of years old, with no structural reinforcements. That's part of the charm. But it also means they can crumble without warning. If you're traveling through these regions, know where the nearest open space is, in case the ground starts shaking. And if you're booking a hotel in a high-risk area, don't be shy about asking how earthquake-safe the building is. Your safety is worth the awkward question. Deepfake and AMP. Digital impersonation scams. Technology has made travel easier, but it's also opened the door to a whole new kind of scam. Digital impersonation. Imagine you get a text from your hotel's front desk saying there's an issue with your booking and you need to confirm your credit card details. The message looks real. It uses the hotel's logo, correct phone number, and even the staff member's name. But here's the truth. Scammers can clone phone numbers, copy email formats, and even use AI-generated videos to make it look like you're speaking to a real employee. I met a traveler in Lisbon who lost over $1,000 this way. She got a call from the airport shuttle driver, who said he was outside, but he just needed a small payment to cover parking. She paid and never saw him or her money again. The rule here is simple. Never share payment details or personal info over a call or text you didn't initiate. If something feels off, go straight to the hotel desk or official counter in person. American expats wrongfully detained. One of the biggest shocks for Americans living in Europe is how easily you can end up in trouble for something you'd never think twice about back home. I've seen it happen. A guy in Prague was fined and briefly detained because he jaywalked during a red pedestrian light, even though no cars were coming. In Amsterdam, an American student was questioned for having a small pocket knife in her backpack, the same kind you might use for camping. And then there are visa issues. Overstaying your Schengen visa by even a single day can land you with fines, an entry ban, or, in some cases, a temporary detainment while they process the violation. The key here is understanding that minor in the US doesn't always mean minor overseas. Always learn the local rules, carry a copy of your ID, and never assume the police will let something slide just because you're a foreigner. Legal overreach in emergencies. When an emergency hits in Europe, local governments can move fast, and sometimes their reach goes further than what most Americans are used to. During the height of the pandemic, some cities in Italy and Spain enforced curfews so strict that tourists were fined for simply walking outside after dark without paperwork. In France, police issued thousands of tickets to people for being more than a kilometer from their homes. These aren't suggestions, they're orders, and violating them can lead to fines, detainment, or even deportation if you're not a resident. If you hear about an emergency order where you're staying, get the facts from official government sources, not social media rumors. Know exactly what's allowed and what's not. The last place you want to be is arguing with a police officer at midnight when the law is technically on their side. Sudden terrorism warnings. It's not something any of us wants to think about while planning a trip, but the reality is, Europe has been the site of several high-profile terrorist attacks in the last decade, and when intelligence services pick up a threat, warnings can go out instantly. Just last year, the U.S. State Department updated advisories for Italy, Germany, and Spain after credible threats were detected around major events and tourist hubs. In some cases, the alerts went public less than 24 hours before the event. I remember being in Berlin when one of these warnings dropped. The Christmas markets were still open, but the police presence tripled overnight. Tourists kept shopping, but you could feel the tension in the air. If you're in Europe when an advisory hits, don't panic, but pay attention. Avoid large gatherings. Keep an eye on official news sources, and have an exit plan if the area suddenly feels unsafe. In situations like this, it's better to be cautious and bored than brave and in danger. Ethnic or religious tensions. Europe is incredibly diverse, and for the most part, that's one of its strengths. But in certain neighborhoods or border regions, long-standing ethnic or religious tensions can bubble up quickly. I've seen it firsthand in parts of the Balkans and certain suburbs outside Paris. A street that's perfectly calm in the morning can become tense by afternoon if there's a political rally or a flashpoint event elsewhere in the world. These aren't tourist-targeted situations, but as an outsider, you can end up caught in the middle without even realizing what's happening. If you're visiting a new city, learn which areas locals avoid during protests or sensitive dates. And if you sense a crowd's mood changing, get out before curiosity turns into a headline you never wanted to be part of. Violent civil unrest in tourist areas. Protests are part of daily life in many European cities. For the most part, they're peaceful, an expression of democracy in action. But every so often, the mood shifts. And when it does, tourists can get caught in the middle with no warning. Barcelona's Las Ramblas, a street that's usually packed with shoppers, street performers, and travelers, has seen marches over Catalan independence that went from singing and speeches to smashed storefronts and burning barricades in minutes. In Paris, the Champs-Élysées, one of the most famous avenues in the world, has turned into a battleground during the Yellow Vest protests, with tear gas hanging in the air and riot police blocking intersections. Even Athens, Syntagma Square, right in front of the Parliament building, has hosted protests that spiraled into violent clashes, scattering both demonstrators and confused tourists alike. I know the feeling firsthand. I once had to duck into a narrow side street in Rome after a peaceful march turned aggressive. I wasn't part of it. I wasn't even filming. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Here's the thing. When you see a protest forming, it's tempting to take photos, especially if the atmosphere feels more like a festival than a riot. But protests can change in seconds. Police may block off streets, public transport may shut down, and that charming piazza you were standing in can suddenly become a tear gas zone. Tips to stay safe. If you hear drums, chanting, or amplified speeches in a major square, check local news or ask your hotel about planned demonstrations. Move at least 3 to 4 blocks away if things feel tense. Avoid lingering, even for photos. The safest vantage point is always outside the action. Keep a mental map of side streets and metro exits in case the main route is blocked. In Europe, protests are a sign of civic freedom. But if you get caught in the wrong one, it's not a political issue anymore, it's a safety issue. Visa maze and AMP. Deportation risks. The Schengen zone feels like a traveler's dream. 27 countries, borderless travel, and no passport checks once you're inside. But for Americans, it's also one of the easiest ways to accidentally ruin your ability to come back to Europe for years. The rule is deceptively simple. You can stay up to 90 days within any 180-day period without a visa. That's it, but here's where it gets tricky. It's not 90 days per country, it's 90 days total across the entire Schengen zone. Spend 60 days in France, hop to Italy for another 40, and you're already 10 days over, whether you realize it or not. I've met Americans who thought, a quick weekend in London or Dublin, reset the clock. It doesn't. That 180-day rolling window keeps counting, and if you go over, even by 1 day, you could face on-the-spot fines, immediate deportation, a multi-year entry ban into all Schengen countries. I once met a traveler in Lisbon airport who was pulled out of the departure line, questioned, and told they couldn't come back for 3 years. Their overstay? 5 days. They thought nobody would notice. They were wrong. And the worst part? Border enforcement is unpredictable. One officer might let a close call slide. Another might stamp your passport, file a report, and flag you in the system. It's a gamble you never want to take. What you can do: use a Schengen calculator app to track your days. Don't trust your memory. Factor in layovers. Even a short stop in a Schengen airport counts toward your 90 days. Understand that rules are enforced based on your passport scans, not on travel forum myths. Europe is welcoming, but the Schengen rules aren't flexible. And if you break them, it's not just one country you're banned from, it's nearly the entire continent. Bureaucracy from hell. If you've ever complained about standing in line at the DMV in the US, let me tell you, you haven't seen anything yet. In parts of Europe, and I'm looking at you, Spain, Italy, Portugal, bureaucracy is almost like an endurance sport. It's not just about filling out forms. It's about knowing which forms, which office, and which exact hours that office is actually open, which may or may not match the hours listed online. I'll never forget trying to register my address in Portugal. First visit, they told me I needed a different form. Second visit, they said I had the wrong version of that form. Third visit, the office was closed for a local holiday I didn't even know existed. By the fourth visit, I finally got it done, only for them to tell me I'd need to come back in 6 months to renew the exact same paperwork. And don't think it's just immigration stuff. Opening a bank account, getting a driver's license, even signing up for utilities. It all comes with mountains of paperwork, stamps, and signatures, often in person, never online. The takeaway? If you're moving to Europe, especially Southern Europe, double your expected timeline for any official process and pack extra patience. Language barriers that cost you. Even if you're in a country where a lot of people speak English, don't assume everything important will be in English. And when you're dealing with contracts, medical care, or legal documents, small misunderstandings can cost you big time. I knew an American in France who signed a gym contract thinking it was a 1-month trial. In reality, she'd signed a year-long membership with no cancellation option. She ended up paying for 11 months she never used. And I'll be honest, I've been burned by this myself. When I first got to Portugal, I signed up for what I thought was a flexible internet bundle. The paperwork was all in Portuguese, and I figured it was just a standard monthly plan. 6 months later, when I tried to cancel because the service wasn't reliable, I found out I'd actually signed a 2-year contract. They hit me with a cancellation fee of €550, just to get out of a plan I never would have agreed to if I'd understood the fine print. Medical situations can be just as tricky. In Spain, I went to the pharmacy for cold medicine and walked out with antibiotics I didn't actually need. All because the pharmacist misunderstood my symptoms. That mistake could have had serious consequences if I'd taken them longer. The worst part is that in official matters, the burden is on you to understand. If you sign something, it's legally binding, even if you didn't understand a word of it. My advice? If you can't read it, don't sign it. Find a translator, a bilingual friend, or pay a professional if you have to. It's a lot cheaper than paying for a mistake you didn't know you made. The two-speed Europe. Tourist versus local prices. Here's something you won't find on the tourist brochure. In some parts of Europe, there are 2 prices, the one locals pay and the one you'll pay as a visitor. And we're not just talking about the obvious stuff like souvenir shops. This happens in restaurants, taxis, and even at public markets. I once ordered a coffee in a Lisbon cafe and paid €2.50, while the guy next to me, clearly a regular, paid €1.20 for the same drink. The only difference? He ordered in Portuguese, and I ordered in English. Taxis are another classic example. In Athens, I overheard a driver quote a fellow tourist €20 for a ride that would normally cost €8. When I challenged him, in Greek, the price dropped instantly. Now, I'm not saying everyone's out to get you, but you will be charged more if they think you don't know better. A good rule of thumb? Learn how to ask for prices in the local language, check online menus before you order, and if you're taking a taxi, agree on a price or make sure the meter is running before you get in. Those little precautions can save you a lot over the course of your trip. Cultural rudeness that shocks Americans. One of the most common complaints I hear from first-time American travelers in Europe is, "Everyone is so rude here." But the truth is, it's often not rudeness at all. It's just a different cultural style. In the US, we're used to customer service that's friendly, chatty, and often full of small talk. In much of Europe, especially in countries like Germany or France, efficiency comes before friendliness. The waiter isn't going to check on you every 5 minutes. The cashier may not smile. That doesn't mean they hate you. It's just not part of the job expectation. Directness is another shocker. I once had a shopkeeper in Italy tell me flat out that a jacket I was trying on didn't look good on me. In America, that might feel personal. Here, it's considered helpful honesty. The key is not to take it personally. If someone's being short or blunt, it's not necessarily an insult. It's just their way. And once you adjust to that, you'll find that many Europeans are warm and welcoming. Once you've earned their trust, they just don't hand it out to every stranger who walks in the door. Unpredictable weather hazards. One of the biggest mistakes Americans make when visiting Europe is assuming the weather will be predictable. It's easy to think that a sunny Mediterranean day will stay that way until it doesn't. Flash floods are more common here than you might realize, especially in countries like Italy, Spain, and Greece. In 2022, parts of Mallorca went from clear skies to waist-deep water in under 2 hours. Streets that were full of cafes and tourists became rivers, sweeping away anything in their path. And if you're thinking about heading to the mountains in early winter or late spring, avalanches are a real risk. In the Alps, even experienced hikers and skiers have been caught off guard when a seemingly safe slope gave way. The lesson? Always check the local forecast and weather alerts, and don't assume good weather means safe weather. In Europe, a perfect day can turn dangerous before you've even finished your coffee. Unregulated adventuring dangers. If you're the kind of traveler who loves adventure, Europe has no shortage of opportunities, but not all of them are safe or even legal. In parts of the Mediterranean, you'll find cliff-jumping spots that locals and thrill-seekers love. The problem? Many have no lifeguards, no safety checks, and no warning signs. One bad jump, one hidden rock under the water, and your vacation could end in the hospital. The same goes for some hiking trails in the Alps and coastal regions. In the US, risky trails are often roped off or clearly marked. In Europe, especially in rural areas, it's not uncommon for dangerous paths to remain open with nothing more than a small sign, if that. If you want the adventure, take it, but know the risks. Ask locals about safety, go with a guide when possible, and don't assume every scenic spot is designed with tourists in mind. False tourist scams run by officials. Here's one you probably don't expect. Scams run by people who look like officials. In some parts of Europe, especially high tourism zones, there have been reports of drivers being stopped by individuals in uniforms, sometimes even with what looks like official paperwork, and fined on the spot for supposed infractions. I've heard of tourists in Eastern Europe being told they parked illegally and had to pay cash immediately to avoid having their car impounded. Quote, others were stopped for minor traffic violations that either didn't exist or carried much smaller fines than they were told. The worst part? They look legitimate enough that most visitors don't think to question them. The best defense is to know the real process in the country you're visiting. In most European countries, legitimate fines aren't paid in cash to an officer. They're sent to you in writing. If someone demands immediate payment, especially in cash, it's a red flag. Ask for ID, take note of their badge or vehicle number, and if you're unsure, call the local police hotline before handing over a cent. Unforeseen transport shutdowns. One of the perks of Europe is the public transportation. Trains, buses, metros, they're everywhere, and most of the time, they're incredibly reliable. But when they shut down unexpectedly, it can throw your plans into chaos in a heartbeat. And I'm not talking about planned maintenance or strikes you hear about on the news. I mean sudden closures. In cities like Paris, Berlin, and Madrid, entire metro lines have been halted midday because of what's officially called a SAMAU, security event. Quote, that could mean anything from a suspicious bag on a platform to an unplanned VIP visit from a head of state. I remember being in Rome when the metro stopped between two stations. The announcement was quick and vague. Quote, service suspended until further notice. Quote, I found out later the Pope was attending a ceremony nearby, and for security, the line was closed. Everyone on that train had to get out, climb back up to street level, and figure out an alternate route, with no taxis in sight, because they were all stuck in rerouted traffic. The takeaway? In Europe, especially in capitals and political hubs, build extra time into your schedule for public transport. Always have a backup plan, a bus route, a walking map, or a rideshare app ready to go. And if you hear the words, security incident, expect delays that might last hours. Mystery food allergies. Europe is a dream for food lovers. Fresh bread in France, pasta in Italy, tapas in Spain. But if you have allergies or dietary restrictions, it can also be a minefield. In the US, ingredient lists and allergen warnings are everywhere. In much of Europe, that's not the case, especially at smaller restaurants, food stalls, or bakeries. Dishes might contain